Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Ontario Liberal MP Yasmin Ratansi is Canada's first Muslim woman MP. Some people describe themselves as having a type A personality. She says hers is a triple A. She's a fiery ball of determination and energy, and she's very much committed to her job both here on the Hill and at home in her constituency. She joins me now to talk all about her life beyond politics. Yasmin Ratansi, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I love being here because you're going to talk about beyond politics.
That's right. Everything to do with your life outside of the political spectrum. So you actually have a really interesting life outside of the political spectrum, and you started your life in Tanzania, which is where you were.
Correct.
How did you end up
coming to Canada?
Yeah.
Well, in 1961, Tanzania got independence. 61, 66, independence, and it became a republic in 66. And during that period in time, Tanzania was going through changes. We were a British protectorate rather than a colony. And politics took over, and I think Nyerere, who was the president at that time, brought in the concept of socialism. Now, what it meant was it nationalized everything my parents owned, or any Asian owned. He nationalized the banks and the insurance companies first, and then we went after industries, then we went after real estate. So my father owned Sisal Estates. He was a realtor. He owned buildings. And when you nationalize everything and don't leave anything for the population, there is no hope. My father decided to send me off to Britain. And so then he told me he couldn't come back to Tanzania because he didn't know what the political environment was going to be.
And they stayed?
He stayed, yeah. He actually, before I left, he passed away.
Oh.
So he made all the arrangements for me to go and study in Britain, and which I did. My mother was left there, and my two other brothers were there. One had already come to Canada, and my two other sisters had gone off to Pakistan.
Wow.
Mm.
And Britain, what did you do in Britain? What did you study?
Interestingly enough, I went to St. Godric's. Now, anybody who knows St. Godric's, it's a finishing school.
Lovely.
Lovely, yes. I learned all the manners in finishing school, but my father also...
Did your father really want that for you to learn?
Well, no. Basically, he thought he'd send me to a boarding school where I'd be protected because he didn't want me alone in London. And he decided to send me to this school, which turned out to be a finishing school, but it was also a high school finishing school.
Right.
So after that, I decided to pursue my further education in Britain, and did partial studies while I was applying to come to Canada.
Okay. Did you like your high school finishing school?
It was interesting. It was an international finishing school, and people came from Bermuda, Nigeria, and the political elite of Britain studied there. So was it an interesting, I think it was an interesting mixture. It enlightened me to what people didn't understand about diversity. And I'll give you an example. There was a Nigerian girl with me, and she said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "From Africa." So she stared at me and said, "Africa?" I said, "Yeah." She says, "But you don't look like me." And then I had to explain to her that like in her countries, there were Asians and other races. I was an Asian, 3 generations that had lived in Africa and had moved to Britain. So that gave me an interesting exposure. So I think, yes, it was a good a stepping stone, a good analysis of what society was like in Britain.
Were you lonely?
No, I make myself very busy, and while you're studying, I network to find out who is around, what community is around, and what can I do. And London offers a lot of artistic things.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to the theatre, you can go to the galleries, you can do whatever you want. And London in the 70s was exciting.
Must have been.
But it had gone through labor strife as well. If anybody knows Harold Wilson, that was the time I was in London, we were going through strikes. So when the teacher would talk about dark continent of Africa, and I looked at the bleak weather outside and no light, I go, who is dark? Africa or Britain? So, yeah.
Why did you want to come to Canada then?
That's a $64 million question.
Okay.
I think everybody in Tanzania had heard about Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Okay.
I think Trudeau was a beacon. He represented what the world should be in his views, in his exposure to the world, in his not only dynamism, but I think his openness. And so my father decided that that would be the country that would be more open to diversity than Tanzania had been at that time.
Did your family remain in Tanzania, most of them? You said you had
No.
2 sisters in Pakistan.
Yes, they all moved to Canada.
Okay.
My sisters moved to Canada. My mother moved to Canada.
Right. So you were at least reunited.
Oh yes, most of them came to Toronto.
Right.
I had a brother who went off to Calgary
Yeah.
with his family. So basically we were Toronto based.
And did you lose everything in Tanzania?
Yes, the only money that I came with was £200.
Wow, isn't that devastating?
It is when you are, I mean, people have to realize in contextual terms, if you come from a country where you've got servants and you've got cars and you do nothing, then you go to Britain, I was safe because I didn't do anything there because I was in a finishing school,
Right.
in a boarding school. But when you come to Canada, you realize you have to do everything yourself. And I think that shift in mentality takes place pretty fast.
What about for your mother?
My mother was, I think she was an amazing woman. She has passed away. She passed away in 2001. She adapted so well. She had never worked, I shouldn't say worked in her life, she was a homemaker, and so she did a lot of voluntary work. But when she came to Canada, she adapted pretty fast and built her own network.
What do you remember? You remember Britain as being a bit of a surprise because you were in a finishing school, and
Right.
because it was bleak weather and you're
Yes.
used to the lovely warmth and humidity of Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
But you arrive in Canada. What was your first impression?
When I arrived, it was November, I think.
Well, it's a great time to
Oh,
arrive.
absolutely. There was snow,
Mhm.
plenty of it. So I was with British boots, which were not meant for snow, with a British coat, which was not meant for the cold winter. And I looked at this landscape and I found it in the late 70s. Toronto was still not the place to be.
Right.
And I had come from London, which was a very cosmopolitan city and very, very busy city. And it had excitement there. And when you come to Toronto, you find it as a dead city. So that was my impression first. I used to speak about dual carriageway. Now, do you know what a dual carriageway is?
No.
Good. That's the terminology that was being used in Britain for a double-lane highway.
Okay.
So, can you imagine me trying to fit in with speaking words that they didn't even know what I was talking about? They go, what is a dual carriageway? I thought, what do they call it? What do they call it here?
So essentially it was like trying to learn a whole new
language.
culture, everything.
Yes.
Weather. You had to
yes.
learn to predict the weather so that you didn't really need to predict, you just need to wear snow boots.
Mm-hmm. And be better equipped
Yeah.
to walk in the snow.
Why stay? Because you probably had lots of other options. You could have gone elsewhere in the world. Or no.
Well, I could have, but I was young and I decided that my father was wise and he had a reason for sending me off to Canada. And if I stayed here long enough,
You'd find it?
yes, I'd adapt. I'd
Okay.
adapt to it.
Okay.
Because this was, it was a young country. And Australia is a young country as well.
Mhm.
This is a young country. It has opportunities to expand. It's not closed in its mindset. And despite the challenges, you realize Canada was the right, and I realized Canada was the right choice to make.
What did you do when you got here?
Well, the first thing you do, I stayed with my brother, and the first thing you do is say, now, how do I get my qualifications recognized? And remember, I was under a British system, studied in Britain, and I faced the same challenges that every other current immigrant faces, and which was, you know, you're equivalent to grade 12, and you say, what? What? What is grade 12? Like, and therefore, you sit there and say, who understands what my educational level is? I did the Cambridge exam, the Oxford exams, and how could my education level be equal to grade 12?
Right.
So I started networking, looking at others who had come, the recent immigrants. What did they do? How did they expand their horizon and get their qualifications recognized? And I bumped into some of my university mates, and they said they had done the CGA course. And that CGA was giving them equivalency, which was reasonable. So I pursued the CGA, but I also networked with business and professional women.
Right.
I joined the business breakfast clubs, and I joined the business and professional clubs, so that you just get an idea of what women are going through. And in that, I had some very good mentors, and got myself started in the right direction.
It sounds like you're a real self-starter.
Yes.
You are.
Yes.
So you take charge of yourself and your surroundings, and is that just who you are, or did you have to become that way?
I think my parents taught us independence, and we were brought up in a country where, you know, we were pampered, but we were taught to think independently. And the best thing I remembered about our house was that we had a library in between in the living room and the dining room, and every day you picked up a book to read. And I think that expanded your horizon, and that made you think independently. I think I've always been independent. As a kid, I was independent. I used to do a lot of things, plays, badminton, swim, go swimming in the sea without anybody chaperoning me. And so I think that type of qualities just comes along with you, and the more somebody challenges you, the more you're determined or persevere. And my father told us never to be despondent. So,
did you ever feel any fear
coming to Canada?
Yeah, and in general, because you're facing so many new situations, and it's easy to be overwhelmed or to feel, frankly, just scared of what you have to get up every morning and do. Did you ever feel that?
You know, it was 37 years ago that I came here to Canada, and I don't think I felt fear. I felt challenged, but I don't think I ever felt fear. My father taught us to be fearless.
He sounds like a very wise person.
He was. He says, who are you afraid of? The only person you should be afraid of is God. So, are they God? And I would say, no. Then he says, well, so why are you afraid?
Interesting.
Yes.